True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
The rural Oklahoma home of Danny and Kathy Freeman went up in flames in the frigid early morning hours of December 30th, 1999. Kathy and Danny's bodies were found inside. They'd both been killed by gunshots to their heads. Their 16-year-old daughter Ashley and her best friend Lauria Bible, who had been there for a sleepover, disappeared from their beds. Years of searching for the two girls came up empty. The search extended into Mexico and Canada, but rumors in the small community pointed to local lowlifes as the killers and kidnappers. Join us at the quiet end for Gone in the Night. The Freemans should have felt safe in their humble country home, but the formerly beautiful landscape of Welch, Oklahoma was immersed in drug culture, and the local police were appallingly ineffective, demonstrating shocking levels of negligence and corruption. So we have a fascinating, heartbreaking story today, and I assume we have a delicious beer.
We do. One of my all-time favorite beers from one of my all-time favorite breweries. This is Bourbon Barrel Aged Weekend from Prairie Artisan Ales in Krebs. This is a phenomenal stout. It's pretty high on the alcohol, 14%, so we will be passing these around. Maybe do like a 2-ounce serving.
Well, maybe 4 ounces.
Yeah, but not a lot.
Too skimpy.
So it's black, little tiny tanned head, nice aroma, chocolate, marshmallow, coconut, and alcohol. Taste is what gets you. Chocolate fudge, marshmallow, coconut, vanilla, and bourbon. Just awesome.
It does sound good.
It is. It's very sweet, very filling. A dessert beer. You probably wouldn't want more than 4 ounces at a time.
Well, unless you want to fall asleep. At least in my case.
Yeah, we could nap well after that.
Absolutely. Well, let's open it up then.
Okay.
All right. Shimmy on down here to the quiet end and share some of that delicious beer with me and our friends.
We'll do that. Let's go.
All right. Let's start out this story, Dickie. What have you got to share?
So December 29th, 1999... was Ashley Freeman's 16th birthday. Now, Ashley was a country girl. She was pretty in a natural, sporty kind of way. She was 5'7", so she was taller than most of the girls her age, but not so tall that she stood out. Her hair was a dark blonde and her skin was fair. Ashley enjoyed the outdoors, but was usually well protected from the sun by her camouflage jacket and a hunting cap. She had learned to shoot at a very young age, and she was an experienced hunter. Now, the family was rugged and sometimes financially pressed enough that they often hunted for their food. So Ashley's father, Danny, also sometimes made jerky and did venison steaks over the wood stove. Sounds like a kind of a difficult life.
Yes, and 1999 was a difficult year.
Yeah, Ashley's big brother had been shot and killed less than a year earlier. This was just January of 1999. Shane was a good kid, but when he got to be 16 or so, he turned into a bit of a troublemaker. Nothing major. He had been getting into some trouble, mostly stealing from houses in the area.
Which is kind of major, right?
Well, it's major if you're the one that's a victim of it.
Sure,
right?
Yeah, right.
But, it wasn't harmful to anybody.
Well, I guess not, but he certainly could have been killed by the neighbors whose houses he was in. Everybody here owned a gun.
Yeah.
So it was dangerous for himself.
It was.
So I guess it was mostly teenager stuff, like taking small value items and eating food from the refrigerators. But it was still risky business.
It was. And like a lot of people, once he started, he escalated. Because on January 8th, he was driving a truck that was stolen. So he's graduated up to bigger thievery. This truck belonged to one of their neighbors. Now, the truck broke down on this lonely old Oklahoma country road, and a deputy arrived. And this deputy was aware that Shane was wanted for thievery. I'm not sure he knew the truck he was in was stolen, but he did know that he had stolen things. And Shane ended up getting shot to death by the deputy. This turned into a major issue.
Well, yes, you're killing a 17-year-old boy. It is a major issue. There's no qualifiers for that. The officer would later say that when he went to investigate and arrest Shane that day, Shane pulled a gun out of his back pocket and threatened him. But according to members of the Freeman family, when they were notified of this shooting, they were told that no gun had been seen on Shane. But then later in the police report, the deputy said that Shane had drawn a gun on him. So this really set off a battle between the Freemans and the sheriff's department.
Well, you can only imagine.
Yes, so Justice for Shane posters were posted all over the town. And Danny said afterwards that the sheriff deputies were following him and stalking the family.
Now, the incident was investigated, and it was decided in favor of the deputy.
That's not a big surprise.
No, it isn't. Local people had their own theories about what happened that day, and the Freeman family was understandably upset and angry, and that created the ongoing hostility between Danny Freeman and the sheriff's office. Danny certainly believed that his son was killed in an act of cold-blooded murder, and according to the family, Shane was shot in the back, which would make the officer's story of what happened untrue. Still, the shooting was ruled justifiable based on the testimony of the shooter, and that's the deputy named David Hayes.
Well, I guess, according to the sheriff's office, this deputy passed a lie detector test when he was giving his version of events.
Oh, so that makes it true.
No, it doesn't.
Oh.
We know that lie detector tests really don't determine who's lying. It just measures the stress response.
Right.
Now, back in the summer of '98, Ashley's father, Danny, who was already known to have a really violent temper, had been charged with abusing Shane. And Shane wasn't the only one who was a victim of Danny's temper. Back in 1985, Danny was charged with beating his father-in-law after the father-in-law trimmed Danny's front yard bushes without asking for permission. So the father-in-law had a restraining order against Danny for his own protection. The local rumor was that Danny was involved in drugs and he was verbally and even physically abusive of his wife and children, but he and Kathy would definitely deny this, and there was no evidence. His wife, Kathy, was described as a very loving, caring person, and she was also a dependable worker. She was the main supporter of the family at this point. She always showed up for work, and she was one who was never in trouble with the law at all. So on Ashley's 16th birthday, her mom, Kathy Freeman, was 37. It was a Wednesday, and Kathy had a lot to do for her daughter's special day. She prepared a late breakfast of biscuits and gravy for Danny. And what Danny had been doing is he was working odd jobs. He did some welding here and there. He also sold wildflowers and willow branches to a local florist. So it was about noon by the time Ashley got out of bed that day. She was out of school for winter vacation. After Kathy called out to her daughter to come and eat her breakfast, she lit a cigarette and planned out what she was going to be doing that day, mostly just some chores. So of course 1999 had been a very difficult year for her, losing her son in this violent and sudden death, which she saw as cold-blooded murder. So she tried to keep busy and do the best she could for her daughter, her only remaining child. That afternoon, Ashley arranged hand-picked flowers into a bouquet with hay from the yard and Christmas holly. Doing these arrangements likely took her back to times when she was little, and she would travel with her father to nearby Oklahoma state lines to collect cattails and lotus pods and various wildflowers. This was all while Kathy was working at her job in an optometrist's office.
Then after Shane's death, Ashley moved into his bedroom. She liked to listen to country music from her brother's radio. And because she had just moved from her room to his, at least half of his furniture was still in there. Ashley kept his football trophies dusted off, and his worn Nikes sat at the foot of the bed. His blue and white Welch Wildcats football jersey hung on one wall, and Ashley would sometimes spray his favorite Tommy Hilfiger cologne on her own flannel shirts, just so she could feel close to him.
So it seems like Shane was a very charming boy. The girls loved him. He was a lot of fun.
Well, it sounds like his sister really loved him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they were very close in age.
Yes.
Yeah. Ashley and her best friend, 16-year-old Lauria Bible, had spent the day before preparing for livestock showings for the county and state fairs. And this was part of the FFA, Future Farmers of America, and the 4-H Club. So these girls knew all about caring for their livestock, including dehorning, ridding them of parasites, and even castrating them. The county and state fairs were a big part of their lives. In this bleakness of winter, they really were looking forward to summer. So Ashley and Laura wandered around the Freemans' property that morning. They were gathering up plants for Ashley's goats to eat. While Kathy prepared breakfast and Ashley and Laura got ready to go out and run errands with her, 40-year-old Danny Freeman was out back. He would sip his coffee in the mornings with a dab of butter in it, which is a new thing to me.
New to me.
As he walked down the hill from his trailer to Big Cabin Creek that afternoon, he listened for rattlers and other venomous snakes. And as he looked over his property, he likely felt very bitter over the death of his son and his lack of a regular, well-paying job. So life was kind of kicking him in the teeth.
Yeah, sounds like he's just kind of surviving.
Yeah, and he wasn't an easy man.
Doesn't sound like he was. Beat up the old father-in-law? Jeez.
Well, he did trim his bushes, so there is that.
There is that.
As 1999 came towards its end, Danny warned his friends and his stepbrother Dwayne Vansell that if anything were to happen to him, you'd be best to look right here. Dwayne would repeat this over the next several years, claiming that in his last days, Danny said, "If anything happens to me or my family, look to the Craig County Sheriff's Office." Dwayne asserted that Danny's demeanor really struck him as fearful and absolute, and according to those who knew Danny well, these were traits rarely seen in him.
And now some people who knew Danny worried that his apparent paranoia was a side effect of his heavy marijuana use. And then there were others that believed he was smack on target. But either way, Danny was not a happy man. He's pretty angry. One other story. Years ago, Danny had accidentally shot himself in his forehead, which sounds laughable until you think he could have killed himself.
Easily.
It happened while he was cleaning a rifle, and the breech plug in the rear of the barrel blew back into his head and into his skull. So the plug was actually lodged inside his brain. So Danny drove himself to the local hospital, waited 2 hours, still hadn't been seen, so he got frustrated and drove 2 more hours to the city hospital. And there, doctors immediately rushed him into surgery, and they replaced part of his skull with bone from his hip. The injury caused severe headaches, making steady employment impossible for him. So when people said that Danny was a tough guy and a bitter guy, they weren't exaggerating, not at all.
Oh, I don't think so, no. So before leaving with Kathy to run their birthday errands, Ashley and Laura waited for her out front, and Danny approached the trailer and wished his daughter a happy birthday. Laura left her 1989 blue Chevy Cavalier beside Danny's truck and got into Kathy's car. And Danny watched them drive off down the long driveway. They passed a Justice for Shane sign at the property's edge, which was decorated with a football that had been signed by Shane's classmates. And classmates and people had also left Beanie Baby bears and candles. It was a memorial to Shane. So with Kathy driving, Laura wiped the frost from the car window and watched as the frozen lands passed them by. Laura's wavy brown hair fell to her shoulders. She also had a beauty mark between her right nostril and her upper lip. Wearing her blue and gold cheerleader jacket, she watched the sun go down by 5:15. The girls' original plan had been for Laura to go home, but because they had a late start and because Laura wasn't allowed to drive after dark, they decided to ask Laura's parents to let her stay over at the Freemans for another night. Their first stop was at a feed store to buy food for Ashley's goats. Laura helped Ashley and her mother pack the bags into the back of Kathy's Toyota before they went to Pizza Hut for Ashley's birthday dinner. Sitting together in a booth, Laura and Ashley chatted and giggled, like best friends do. And after they ate, they went to Walmart, where Laura helped Ashley pick out a birthday cake. White frosting on a half vanilla, half chocolate cake. Then they drove to the home of Kathy's mother, Celesta, and stepfather, Bill Chandler. Kathy would sometimes pick up water for drinking from there. The Freemans did have running water, which was usable for their laundry and their toilets and showers, but the water in their trailer came from the Big Cabin Creek, and it wasn't drinkable. So this is kind of a hard scrabble life.
Boy, it sure is. So Laura's house was only a few minutes from the Chandlers, so it was the next stop. Kathy and Ashley waited in the car as Laura ran into the house. Her father, Jay, had just returned from his job at an auto parts store. So rushing to keep Ashley and her mother from waiting too long, Laura dashed to her bedroom to collect a clean set of clothes. And she asked her father if she could spend another night at Ashley's, and Jay said yes, as long as she was back home by noon the next day to care for her animals. Years later, Jay would say, noon never came the next day.
Well, Laura was excited and smiling as she rushed back out the door without saying goodbye. But she stopped and turned around and kissed her father's cheek, saying, "I love you, Dad." So they were her last words to her father, as she bolted down the steps of her porch and ran back to Kathy's car. As they drove away, Laura's mother, Lorene, on her way home from work, slowed her car to a stop beside them. And Laura told her mother that her father said it was okay if she stayed another night with Ashley. Lorene reminded her daughter that she did have a dentist appointment the next morning, so Laura then agreed to be home by 8 a.m. Like with her father, "I love you" were the last words Lorene heard from her daughter. Kathy smiled back at Lorene as the three slowly pulled away and made their trip back to the Freemans' home.
Yeah, but the three of them made one more stop at a convenience store in Welch, which was owned by the grandmother of Ashley's boyfriend, Jeremy Hurst. They bought some soda, and they invited Jeremy over for cake. It was going to be a modest celebration. Once they got back home, Kathy took the cake to the counter, put 17 candles on it, 1 for luck plus 16 for each year of life. They sang happy birthday, and Ashley blew out the candles and made a wish. So Jeremy stayed over at the Freemans until about 8:30 or 9. Then he went home, and he would say later that nothing unusual had happened, and everybody was behaving normally that evening.
So Jack and Diane Bell lived just a few miles further into the country, up from the Freemans' property. A married couple, they both worked at the Eastern State Hospital for the Insane, located about 20 miles south, where there was a working farm for the patients. As Jack got ready for their early shift, Diane prepared thermoses of chili and wrapped up some leftover cornbread for their lunches. Jack went to the kitchen and filled 2 large mugs with coffee. Wearing their long johns and heavy coats at 5:40 a.m., Jack and Diane got into their truck and tuned the radio to the local weather. They drove south, seeing nothing but darkness. But as Diane sipped her coffee, she saw a glow in the sky just over a hill. She nudged Jack, pointing out the light. Jack tilted his head and turned the car east toward the light, his headlights reflecting on a hand-painted sign that read, "Justice for Shane," and this was at the end of the Freemans' long driveway. They knew the farm belonged to the Freemans, and when they got closer, they could see that the Freeman trailer was engulfed in flames. So Jack went and stopped at the first house he saw, the home of Wade and Kim Sherrick. Kim called 911 at 5:50 a.m. Afterwards, Jack and Diane Bell continued to drive to work. So Wade and Kim went to their children's bedrooms and wrapped up their 6- and 4-year-old children in blankets. The family of 4 then squeezed into the cab of their family truck and drove down to the top of the road. When they reached the Freemans' property, only half of the trailer was on fire. But the Sherricks couldn't get out of their truck because the Freemans' family dog, Sissy, a pretty imposing Rottweiler, jumped on the car doors and barked at them. So all they could do really was to watch as the fire took over the other half of the trailer.
Yeah, I think it'd be tough to get out of that car with a Roddy barking at you.
Yeah, and apparently the dog was worked up.
Well, yeah.
Because he'd been through some things. The Welch Volunteer Fire Department showed up at 6:10. That was 20 minutes after the 911 call. The Sherricks knew all of the firemen as they arrived, so they rolled down their truck windows and shouted out to them from the truck. The Sherricks ended up staying there for less than an hour because Kim had to be at work by 7. The Craig County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene a short time after the firefighters. Sheriff Vaughn's position as sheriff was an elected one, and he'd previously served as sheriff of the same county from 1969 to 1973. Then he'd come in with a group of his own, and the positions in his office were all hand-picked by him, which I guess was pretty normal for the sheriff.
Yeah, well, you can certainly pick the people you want to work with, right?
Apparently, yes. At the burning trailer, a volunteer fireman came out of the house, removing his helmet and taking in deep breaths of the fresh air. And he pointed back at the house as he told the deputies that he had found 1 fatality inside. So Craig County Sheriff's Office deputies briefly looked inside, noting that the body was found near 7:30 a.m. At 7:33, the sun had risen. Sheriff Vaughn told a deputy to call Donna Warren. She was the medical examiner. Then he called the OSBI, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. The sheriff's office was standing down. Vaughn said that the OBSI would be handling the case because of the bad blood between the sheriff's office and the Freeman family.
That's probably a good idea.
That sounds reasonable to me, yes.
Until nothing got investigated.
Well, everything just seemed to get so fucked up that it seems like the sheriff's office was kind of more involved in some ways, right?
Right.
So it just seemed like kind of a mess from what I can gather.
Yeah, it does sound that way. So the body that had been found by the fire volunteers had only briefly been seen by the deputies. It was in one of the bedrooms, lying face down on the bed. Fire had destroyed a lot of the body. The upper back and buttocks were burned down to the muscle, and the feet and lower legs had been burned off completely. But the most notable fact was that the skull had been shattered. Around the body's completely unrecognizable head there were some bricks. The fire had caused the ceiling to collapse, and investigators soon learned that there had been bricks on the roof from an unfinished roofing project in the summer.
Yeah, so authorities at first thought maybe the bricks were the cause of this person's mortal head injury.
Okay.
But that wasn't the case.
So the sheriff's employees stayed in front of the house, and they refused to re-enter until the OSBI arrived. There were 3 vehicles parked out front: Denny's truck, Kathy's Toyota Corolla, and Laura's blue Chevy Cavalier. On the front of the Cavalier, there is an airbrushed license plate that read Dragon Wagon, and Vaughn recognized it as Lauria Bible's car.
Well, Laura was the only daughter of Lorene and Jay Bible, and she was also the only sibling of her brother Brad, who was 2 years older. Her middle name, Jaylene, is a combination of her parents' names, Jay and Lorene. She grew up in a very conventional Midwestern family, sharing Sunday dinners at her grandparents' house. Laura had babysat for many families in the area, carrying with her this large bag that she kept filled with coloring books and games for the kids. So she was a very desired babysitter by local children.
Yeah.
She brought her own stuff.
And she's probably fun to hang out with.
Absolutely. After the sheriff had identified Laura's car at the scene, Deputy Troy Messick made the drive down from Welch to downtown Veneta to find Lauria Bible. He walked slowly from his cruiser and into the McDonald's where Lauria worked. Lauria had already received a call from her son Brad, telling her that there had been a house fire at the Freemans. But they didn't know the severity, of course, and they thought it was probably just a small kitchen fire. After hearing from Brad, Lauria immediately hung up and called the Freeman house, but the phone just rang and rang. Then Deputy Messick walked in. Messick and Lauria already knew each other. He said, "We need to go somewhere and talk," and took her back to her office. She was a regional manager. Messick told Lauria that the whole house was gone, but only one body had been found, and it was in the front bedroom. Lauria told Messick that she knew that the front bedroom belonged to Kathy and Danny. So Deputy Messick got on the radio and relayed to the authorities on the scene that Lauria had confirmed the room where the body was found was the parents' bedroom. Lauria called her husband Jay then at the auto parts store where he worked. He picked her up at McDonald's, and they stopped to tell Kathy's mother Celesta that there had been a fire at her daughter's home. Celesta rode with Lauria and Jay to the end of the Freeman's driveway, and they arrived around 9:15. Once the sheriff's office made the choice to hand over the scene to the OSBI, they had given up all responsibility. One fire department volunteer remembered that the body had been face down on the bed, and when he looked in closer, he saw a woman's naked breast. But the body was too damaged to know which female it belonged to, Kathy, Ashley, or Laura.
So Lauria wanted to know what the sheriff's office was doing to search for the girls. Because right now we have just the dead body, probably Kathy's. Her husband's missing, her daughter's missing, and her daughter's friend is missing.
Yes, that's right. 3 missing people and a homicide. Because they're pretty sure with that head injury that she was murdered, and it wasn't just that she died in the fire. Of course, they'll learn more about that from the medical examiner.
Right. The girls could have escaped and be in hiding, or they could have gotten hurt and been lying somewhere nearby.
Well, really, anything could have happened. They don't know at this point.
No.
They needed to keep an open mind.
But we got lots of rumors.
Yes. Which is unfortunate because it really seemed to damage the investigation right from the beginning to make assumptions.
Yeah, but how are you going to avoid those?
Well, I mean, it's fine to let people in the community spread rumors, but as a professional investigator, you're supposed to look at just the facts, right?
Right.
Now, among the locals on the scene, the rumor was that Danny had finally lost it and killed his wife, Kathy. He could be hiding with the girls, waiting to shoot at the sheriff's department officers. Lauria Bible was assertive, and she called out to the investigators, asking them to search for Laura and Ashley. She asked if they had looked in the 3 cars belonging to Danny, Kathy, and Laura. What if there was something important in the vehicles? I mean, what if the bodies were in there, or there was a body in a trunk? So the sheriff finally did have the cars searched. But it was almost like Lauria had to tell him what his job was.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Like, do this.
There was no one in the trunks. They did find Laura's keys in her car, but that's not really unusual.
No, out in that rural type of area, there aren't car thieves around, are there?
Not usually, no. Unless it's a teenage boy going for a joyride, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, except for.
Yeah.
Assistant District Attorney Clint Ward arrived at the scene. He was just days away from leaving his job as the ADA before going into private practice. According to witnesses, he told other people at the scene that Danny had a big drug debt. So this planted the idea that the murder and the fire were drug-related, even though there wasn't any evidence for this. Now, medical examiner Donna Warren arrived late at the scene because of a 4-fatality accident, but she was there by 3:30 in the afternoon. She went into what was left of the Freemans' home, where the wall of the master bedroom still stood kind of upright. The head of the waterbed was pressed up against the wall, with the upper body of the deceased female lying face down across the bed. Her knees were off the bed, while what remained of her feet were on the floor. The waterbed had exploded in the fire and protected the front of the body, so it was mostly unburned. Back of the body was charred, and the nightgown was completely burned away.
So meanwhile, outside, the Bibles are growing very impatient and irritated. They don't know where their daughter is. The OSBI allowed only Danny's stepbrother, Dwayne, and Laura's father, Jay Bible, to search down near the creek for the girls. At 4 o'clock, the female body was brought out of the rubble by deputies and put in the back of a hearse. In the crowd, Emmy Donna Warren found Lauria. They'd known each other because Warren had been Lauria's mother's primary physician years back. So it seems like just about everybody knows everybody.
Small town life.
Yeah. So Lauria waved over the ME and said, "Who is that?" referring to the body. So Warren leaned in and spoke into Lauria's ear, telling her that it was a woman who had borne children and she was wearing a wedding ring. So at least to Lauria, this confirmed that the body in the house was Kathy Freeman. So just after 4 o'clock, Kathy's burned body was driven away toward Tulsa. Agent Steve Nutter announced that he had wrapped up the investigation, and then he released the scene to Danny's stepbrother, Dwayne.
Am I missing something?
You're not.
What investigation? You haven't told me any investigation.
It's bad, I know. I don't know how to answer you.
Okay.
It's just difficult to even imagine.
You did. It just wasn't done.
Right. Property described in the search warrant as the charred remains of a mobile home was now out of the hands of the investigating officers, he said, and in the hands of the Freemans' next of kin. So, should we talk a little about how preposterous this is?
Well, don't think we have to spend really any time. They did nothing.
Not really, no.
Absolutely nothing. And, even when the OSBI guy was called out on it, he said, well, there's nothing else that can be done here.
I know, but it is incredible. It's completely incredible to me. If nothing else, there are 2 missing teenage girls that should be searched for.
Yeah, particularly some neighbors had reported Danny driving through a gate with the girls in his white pickup truck over where the pond is, even despite that.
Well, no, I don't think it's despite that. I think that was his reason for leaving, is they were afraid Danny was going to shoot at them. And that's the way it was interpreted by people at the time.
It's just mystifying.
It is. It really is. So investigators were done with this crime scene by 6 p.m. that evening. They took about 8 hours there. Did very little.
Dwayne is surprised to hear that the investigation was wrapped up.
Well, that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. Now that Danny's vehicle had been accounted for, right?
Well, it had been parked there, so how would he have had it with the girls?
Yeah. Well, I'll go up there and ask and look for him, Dwayne suggested. Won't do him any good if I have authorities with me. I'll be able to talk to him if he has the girls.
So yeah, he was going to do that, but Nutter said no, it's getting too dark. Someone might get hurt. He suggested that Dwayne could run up there in the morning and see if Danny was there. So seeing that Nutter was on his way out that night, the Bibles came over to talk to him. What about the girls? Aren't you going to search for them? Lorene asked. And he said, if Danny's got the girls, then it's just best that we let him cool off. It's getting late. We'll look for them tomorrow.
That's just unbelievable.
I know. Several police officers believed that Danny was capable of an ambush on them, and I guess this had made them nervous to even be there. But that's not your job as law enforcement, to be afraid and leave.
No.
The idea of Danny with a firearm aimed at them makes them anxious, and I can understand that. But anxious enough to leave the scene behind, a crime scene?
Oh, I know.
It wasn't even protected overnight. It's not like they said, well, it's getting dark, we're going to go home for the night and start again in the morning. No, they turned the crime scene over. So anyone could just go walking through there.
Could go around digging through it. Yep.
Yeah, which means any evidence they would find would be completely useless because there's no chain of custody.
That's right.
So Dwayne remembered Danny telling him that if anything happened to him or his family, he should look at the sheriff's office, remember?
Yeah, he mentioned that.
So no attempts had been made to find the girls beyond a cursory check of the creek out back, which had been made by Dwayne and Jay Bible. After the police left, several men began to search the property on horseback. Fear could have paralyzed any parent in this situation, but not Jay and Lorene. They were determined to do the investigation on their own if necessary. And at this point, it did seem necessary. No one else was going to do it.
It sure did. I mean, this is even after people or police officers are concerned that Danny could be up there with a gun ready to shoot them.
Yeah.
There are still plenty of people that were willing to look for the girls.
Yes.
Even with that possible threat.
But if they do think that a man killed his wife and then took his daughter and her friend and was hiding out with a gun, they were absolutely responsible to go looking for them.
Yeah.
It's not okay to say let him cool off overnight, especially if he had murdered someone, and if that was the case, the girls were at quite a bit of risk from him.
Exactly.
So the whole thing's just crazy. At least one tip was called in that day, and this was from a neighbor man who claimed that he had seen Danny Freeman at a nearby gas station filling up a white Ford pickup with Ashley and Laura in the truck. Danny isn't going to give the girls back, the man told the dispatcher. He won't give them back until you give him the man who killed his son. So the OSBI decided that they would wait until morning to investigate it. And that night, they had Lorene and Jay Bible go in to be interviewed separately by agents.
So the next day, New Year's Eve, December 31st, Lorene and Jay returned to the scene of the fire to search. So the Freeman's dog, Sissy, was still there, standing in the same spot in the master bedroom where the body of Kathy Freeman had been removed in a black plastic body bag just one day previous. The trailer stood on bare axles and wheels. Most of the flooring had fallen through to the ground, except for the master bedroom. There, the flooring was mostly intact because the waterbed had soaked the area. So what that amounted to is that the master bedroom was certainly better preserved than all the other rooms. So Jay was walking carefully around the rubble, and Lorene was bent down nearby, overturning debris. In the ashes, she saw a framed wedding photo of Danny and Kathy. Then, with the dog standing nearby, Jay looked over the unburned portion of the floor of the master bedroom. And then he saw what he would describe later as something that looked like a bowl of hamburger meat. And this was Danny, or at least Danny's destroyed head.
Well, that's very macabre. But within minutes of arriving, Jay Bible had found a second body.
That they had missed the previous day.
And how, we don't know. It seems impossible to have missed this.
Yes, it does.
This body was identified as Danny Freeman, and upon autopsy it was determined that both Danny and Kathy had been shot in the head with a shotgun and killed before their home was set on fire.
So Lorene and Jay are looking at each other in disbelief. How did the investigators miss this entire human body? And it was. Except for his head being obliterated, his body was intact, not just a sack of ashes.
No, they could tell it was a body. They could tell it was a man.
So how do you miss that? Anyway.
That's the big question. I think maybe there was just this assumption that Danny had done it and taken off, but that's very irresponsible and doesn't even make a lot of sense to me.
I know, it doesn't.
So each theory about how Kathy had died and each theory about Danny taking the girls had been wrong. Shocked by the sight of the burned body, Jay turned away and called the sheriff's office. Right by his feet, feral barnyard cats were playing with what would turn out to be a human nasal bone. So this is horrendous.
Nice.
And you have to remember that these are parents looking for their daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Their daughter's body could very well be in there. So this is horrific for them and completely irresponsible of the investigators. The feet of the second corpse were partially under the corner of the waterbed and partly hidden by the deflated mattress. The upper body was partially covered by a rug, and what was left of the head was in the doorway, face up, with one arm propped up in the doorframe. Cowboy boot prints, believed by both the Bible and Freeman families to be from OSBI agent Nutter, were visible on the corpse's torso. So he had walked on this body and not noticed it.
Yeah.
The fire had burned much of the charred body's clothes right off and exposed the genitalia, so they were immediately able to tell that this was a man. Also, the metal wiring that had been used to reconstruct Danny's sinus cavities could be seen in what remained of his face and his skull. So they felt pretty certain right off it was Danny, and that would be confirmed by the medical examiner.
It was determined that Kathy had been shot in the head from behind, and Danny was shot while facing his killer. And both were dead before the fire was started. The autopsy report confirmed this. So somebody had wanted them dead, and that somebody likely had taken the two girls.
Sure. So now they don't have Danny as a suspect. The investigators suggested that the girls could have killed Ashley's parents and run away together.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how you jumped to that conclusion.
I know. Well, if you want to be really suspicious, it could be because the sheriff's office was responsible for this.
Okay.
But everyone who knew the family didn't believe that Ashley was capable of even running away, let alone killing her parents. She loved her parents and she loved her home. So this was now a double homicide and 2 teens were missing. But law enforcement was not doing anything to search for them. This was incredibly frustrating and shocking.
Yeah, putting it mildly. Deputy Troy Messick was the first to arrive back at the crime scene. And referring to the OSBI, Messick echoed what Lorene and Jay were thinking. How the hell did they miss this? They're supposed to be the experts. These are the big shots, right?
Well, they should be. It's the State Bureau of Investigation, yeah.
Not the little yokel police department.
Nope.
Well, they're not very expert.
Well, they weren't in this case. As Deputy Messick called for backup, Jay found Danny's 2 front teeth, still attached to some gum, but detached from the jaw, in the grass of the front yard.
Oh, pleasant picture.
The outdoor cats were continuing to chew on some of his bones. And of course, animals had been eating on his body overnight because the property had been left unattended. Dwayne returned to the property later that morning, and he was waved over by the Bibles. He was shocked to see his stepbrother's charred body in the burned-out mobile home, and couldn't understand how it was missed. Join the club. None of us can. The sheriff and deputies returned to the scene sometime between 7 and 7:30 a.m., and they began to tape off the area all over again. Then they called the OSBI back and waited for them. Definitely aware of the scrutiny that this ridiculous oversight would bring to the Bureau, OSBI agent Nutter returned, bringing along about a dozen more agents. So at least trying to appear like he's now taking it seriously.
At least a little more seriously.
Yes, but Jay and Lauria Bible are done. They're not going to trust these people.
Oh, no.
Despite several attempts to get the Bibles to leave the scene, Lorene and Jay refused. Lorene said that she and Jay would not be leaving until they knew that the scene had been searched thoroughly this time. So the OSBI objected, but she reminded them that they'd already released the crime scene over to Dwayne the evening before. She said, "You had your day, now it's mine." So I'm totally on board with why Lorene would say and do this, But at the same time, the investigators really had a responsibility to remove them and do the job correctly themselves. But they didn't. They just didn't.
Well, I mean, at this point, to me, it's kind of a moot issue. Even if they had done everything, the evidence is tainted.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So,
the scene is compromised. So from there, hundreds of townspeople came to help the Bibles find the girls, and by 9 o'clock they were lined up in the driveway leading up to the trailer, waiting for the Bibles to give them instructions. Medical examiner Donna Warren arrived late again, held up by another fatal car accident. "What the hell happened here?" she asked one of the deputies. "Who found the body?" So when she learned that Lauria Bible had found Danny's body, she was shocked. This was not the way things were supposed to be done. Because no gun was found anywhere near Danny, that ruled out a murder-suicide. Soon after, his body was removed, and once that was done, the Bibles got busy.
Because investigators failed to find an entire human body in the trailer, Lauria couldn't trust them to find anything that might be helpful in finding the girls. She's written them off.
You can't blame her at all.
No, you can't. She decided that the search would be better run by the families and volunteers. So agents from the OSBI and the sheriff deputies moved aside as Lauria took over the crime scene, along with about 100 volunteers. Even staff from the local funeral home came to help. They put up a tent outside the trailer and offered food and drink for the volunteers.
Sissy the Rottweiler went to the end of the driveway over and over that day. She barked and howled where the road reached the driveway. A lump with dried blood on top of Sissy's head was assumed to be the result of being hit with the butt of a shotgun. Dwayne organized the searches, and he became convinced that the girls must have left or been taken in the direction where Sissy was barking. Dwayne had been to the Freeman home often, and he noticed that a large arrowhead collection was missing. But can we really say that the killers took it because the crime scene's been left? Kids could have come by and taken things. Who knows?
Anybody.
So he didn't even think the arrowheads would have been a motive for the crimes, but he thought they could have been a trophy for the killer or the killers. Lauria and her volunteers pulled this entire trailer apart. They cut the axles and they tore up everything right down to the earth. And this took several days, but nothing there remained unturned or unexamined. And that's what Lorraine insisted on. She wanted to do a very thorough search so she could say, with no question in her mind ever, that her daughter was not there.
In the late afternoon of their second day there, Lauria found Laura's purse near the north wall. And that's where Ashley's bedroom had been. Inside the purse, Lauria found Laura's ID and Christmas money, which was about $200.
So, if the girls had left on their own, you'd think they would take the $200 at least.
Yeah, they would take the $200. They would take a car.
Likely, yeah.
And there's so much wrong with thinking that the girls were behind this.
Well, they just weren't troubled girls, right? They weren't partiers. They didn't have boyfriends that were trouble. They were just pretty innocent girls that did 4-H stuff. They're not girls who are going to kill their parents and run off. And everybody knew that. That's the thing. Lorraine also found one of Laura's partly burned pajama tops, which likely meant that the fire had started before Laura and Ashley got ready for bed. Either that or their kidnappers had made them change out of their pajamas before leaving the scene with them.
In the search, family and volunteers found 13 guns that had belonged to the Freemans. They put them out in the front yard. Any one of the guns could have been the murder weapon, but they just sort of stayed resting on the front lawn for a week.
That's another thing that's crazy.
Yeah. None of the guns were collected as evidence by the agents or officers who were nearby, and therefore nobody was even aware of their existence.
None of them were collected as evidence by the agents or officers who were nearby, and obviously knew of their existence because they were nearby and saw it. So they knew the guns were there and they did nothing.
Yeah.
So that's another really shocking thing. Even if there wasn't the concern that these were murder weapons, is it really responsible to leave guns on a lawn?
No.
And especially since they're from a homicide scene.
You would want to check those guns to see if one of them could be the murder weapon.
That's the one thing, and there are 100 other reasons why you don't leave them there. J. Bible was pretty much done with investigators. He called up the local radio station and asked them for help. And because of this, there were 500 volunteers on the scene on the third morning of the search. The grid search expanded to a 5-mile radius, with Jay and Dwayne organizing small groups to look at different areas of the property. Each and everything, no matter how incidental, was marked by volunteers, who then turned things over to Jay or Dwayne. It was the family, not the sheriff's office or the OSBI, who put down evidence markers. In fact, that morning there were no law enforcement professionals even there at all. They hadn't even bothered to show up. Any evidence found had a broken chain of custody because the scene had been left unattended, so even though they're doing the right thing, finding things and marking them, these things likely couldn't be used in any court.
No, they couldn't.
So even when the volunteers found things, these weren't usable.
Later that afternoon, Lorene sought out the help of a family friend to make missing posters for Laura and Ashley at their office supply business. So after picking the flyers up, Lorene drove to the Veneta Police Department to confirm that the girls had been entered into the databases of the NCIC, as OSBI agent Nutter said he would do on the first evening when the girls went missing.
Lorene knew someone there who she spoke to, and Lorene learned from him that Nutter had not entered the girls into the database. So Lorene took care of that herself as well. For Lorene, it was another sign that law enforcement was not acting in the best interests of these missing girls. A missing child is a priority, and a search should have been done immediately. No police were looking for Ashley or Laura at all. In this case, no Amber Alert had been issued either. In addition to the volunteers, 2 private investigators joined this search, Tom Pryor and Joe Dugan. Danny's stepbrother Dwayne hired them for $1 to help with the case, so they were basically volunteering their services.
Right.
At the end of the driveway, about 50 feet from the road, Tom Pryor found a car insurance ID card. Pryor had been doing his job for a long time, and he knew that the insurance card of an unknown woman this close to a quiet rural road could be nothing, or it could be something very important. Pryor walked back up the driveway and asked around for who was officially in charge, and he eventually found Agent Steve Nutter, who had decided to show up, I guess. Introducing himself, Pryor held out the insurance card and said, "This might be of some interest to you." But according to Pryor, Nutter looked down at him and gave him a really smug response. "Hey, why don't you leave this investigation to the big boys? We don't need any PIs coming around here screwing things up for us. Keep it up and I'll have your license revoked so fast you won't even know what hit you." Whoa. Pryor was really taken aback by the hostility.
I am too.
Yeah, this Nutter sounds like a real nutter.
Maybe he's feeling guilty about lack of investigation.
Well, and I think maybe more than guilt, he's feeling defensive.
Sure.
Yeah.
So after they discovered the insurance card on the Freeman property, Pryor and Dugan traced it back to a woman in the town of Chitopo, Kansas. This is about 10 miles from the Freeman property. The woman, E.B., pointed investigators in the direction of her boyfriend, Phil Welch.
Well, many local people would refer to Phil Welch as the devil himself. He was a well-known meth cook as well as an addict. Phil Welch had 2 homes, one in nearby Pitcher, Oklahoma, where he cooked meth, and one in Chitopa, Kansas, where his wife and her children were living. One of the children would tell author Jax Miller that her mother was only married to Welch because she was afraid that he would kill her otherwise. So this Welch, really scary guy.
Really is.
Just outside of Pitcher in January 2000, just a couple weeks after the murders, the 2 PIs found Phil Welch. They didn't tell him who they were, but they did offer him a ride.
In the truck, the men felt that Welch had a creepy, kind of Manson-like quality to him.
He has that look if you look at a picture of him.
He's scary.
He is very creepy.
The tips of his fingers were burned, and his nails were black.
Now, the burned fingers has to make you think of the arson, correct?
Certainly would. So the 3 of them went to a drive-through burger place, and as they're waiting for their food, Welch pointed to the hills surrounding them. "See this place?" he asked. God's damnation. Wicked people. There's no saving anyone here. And Pryor and Dugan are nodding, just kind of humoring him. And then after some time had passed in silence, Pryor asked Welch, "You hear about those girls in Welch?" "Yeah," Welch said, "I heard about them two little bitches." Pryor told Welch that some girls he talked to had told him that a man named Phil Welch was responsible for kidnapping the girls. Then Welch admitted that he was that Phil Welch, and he began to stutter and ramble religious phrases. And he started to twitch, scratching at his arms and babbling lines from sermons and Bible verses. So Pryor and Dugan are feeling pretty confident that this guy had heard something about Laura and Ashley in the weeks after their disappearance. Maybe he was even involved in it. Pryor feared that if he didn't let Welch out of the truck, he could become violent. And Welch practically climbed over Pryor to get out of the truck. Pryor and Dugan then watched Welch walk off till he disappeared.
Well, there was an affidavit where witnesses claimed to have seen a video from a New Year's party at the home of another known meth cook and dealer, Chester Shadwick. In the video, they claimed to have seen a girl who resembled Ashley with dirty blonde hair on her knees being sexually assaulted by one of the men. Some other sources have claimed that two meth dealers named the Glovers had a party at their place and that they were involved in the abduction, abuse, and murder of Ashley and Laura. But a search of the property came up empty. And that's kind of the scenario here for years and years, are searches and finding nothing.
Right, that was the theme. Now, in 2001, the case was on Unsolved Mysteries. And in the show, it was mentioned that the Freemans had been feuding with the Craig County Sheriff's Department over the death of their son, Shane. Danny's stepbrother, Dwayne, said in the show that Danny had told him the deputies had been following him and intimidating him. Meanwhile, volunteers continued to search for the girls. 1 year after their disappearance, a memorial service for Ashley and Laura was held in Welch.
Well, in 2009, after private investigator Joe Dugan died, his family reportedly tried to turn over his investigative files on the case to the Craig County Sheriff's Office, but they turned down the offer. And for some reason, the family ended up destroying these files. Over the next several years, two convicted killers confessed to murdering Danny and Kathy and kidnapping and killing Ashley and Laura. Jeremy Jones claimed that he murdered the parents over a drug debt, took the girls to Kansas and killed them, putting their bodies into a mine. Searches of mines identified by Jones came up with nothing, and Jones finally did admit that he had made it up. Then notorious serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells wrote to the Joplin Globe newspaper and confessed. But his confession was also determined to be false. He had just used what he read about the crime in order to get extra attention and food from the police. So the case went cold again. Then in December 2015, the Bible's Facebook page, Find Lauria Bible, received a tip to look at another convicted killer who had been an associate of Danny Freeman's. This was Charlie Kreider. Basically, the two were good friends and they smoked marijuana together. Searches of a well on his former property and an old basement yielded nothing. Kreider had seemed like a good suspect because he was convicted in 2004 of strangling a woman to death, so we knew he was capable of murder. But another search where nothing was found. Then in late 2017, Craig County announced the discovery of a lost set of investigation files related to the case that they described as extremely valuable. The files were discovered after Heath Winfrey was sworn in as the new sheriff earlier that year. Then finally, in 2018, a man named Ronnie Dean Busick was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Ashley, Laura, Danny, and Kathy. There were 2 other suspects, but both had died since the murders. Phil Welch died in 2007, and David Pennington died in 2015. I think being really involved with that meth can shorten the length of your life considerably.
You think?
Well, if you look at the pictures, they look like hell.
Yeah.
They all look like 90 years old, like they've been baking in the sun with their teeth rotting out of their heads.
Yeah, it's a tough life.
So according to an article in the Washington Post, there were at least a dozen witnesses who claimed to have heard all three of these men bragging about raping and murdering the girls, and that they had taken some Polaroid photos of them. There were also witnesses who alleged that the three men had killed them over drug money owed by Danny. Danny was a known marijuana user, and he probably sold a little bit too, but there was no evidence that he was a meth user or involved in that world at all. According to these witnesses, Ashley and Laura were held in Welch's trailer for several days, and they were abused and raped during this time before finally being murdered. Now that's just a horrible, horrible thing.
It certainly is.
That's a fate worse than just about anything I can think of. It's really heartbreaking, really. You just have to be heartbroken over this.
So one witness, who was a woman who had lived with Welch after the girls' disappearances, gave a sworn affidavit saying that she had heard conversations between Busick, Welch, and Pennington, where they had said that the murder victims had owed them money. Also, she said that Welch had kept a briefcase with the Polaroids showing both girls bound and gagged with duct tape and lying on a bed. And Welch was also in some of the photos. So Welch, Pennington, and Busick had also claimed to have raped and tortured the girls before putting their remains in a pit or mine shaft in Pitcher, Oklahoma.
Okay, so shouldn't the people who saw these photos and kept quiet for years be held accountable for covering up these crimes?
They didn't specifically break any laws, right?
I don't know. Knowing of a crime and not saying anything is not illegal? Especially a crime like murder and rape?
Well, I think you could charge them with obstruction or something like that for not revealing the evidence.
Well, to me, it's morally reprehensible.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole different thing, though.
They were saying they were afraid of these men, which I totally understand, but that doesn't mean you don't say anything. It means you protect yourself. You go to the police. If the police won't offer you protection, you move away. There's some way that you could do it anonymously as well. Something. But apparently, they're just free and easy after this. After the arrest, Lauria and J. Bible released a public statement. They stated that they had been aware of these alleged photos for years, but that their focus needed to remain on finding Ashley and Laura. After Busick was arrested, he told reporters that he wanted to speak with Lauria and J. Bible. Lauria did speak with him in hopes of finding out where the girls' bodies were, but then he denied any involvement or any knowledge of the whereabouts of the girls' remains. But then, quite recently in July of 2020, Busick pleaded guilty to being an accessory to the first-degree murders of Danny and Kathy, arson, and the abduction and presumed killings of the two girls. He did admit to withholding information about the involvement of Pennington and Welch also, but he was only sentenced to 15 years, which is a little strange to me.
Yeah, he's confessed, right? He's murdered 4 people, or been involved in the murder of 4 people. 15 years? Really?
Yeah. Busick's attorney said that her client told investigators everything that he knew, though. She said Pennington and Welch never told Busick what they did with the girls after they killed them. So he's kind of blaming the dead guys.
Yeah, why not?
Cold case investigators believe that the suspects may have gone to the Freeman home that night looking for a payment on a drug debt. Money and other things may have been stolen after the shootings of Danny and Kathy. Then the two girls may have run away from the burning home and hid outside, where the suspects found them and abducted them, which is just a horrifying thought. These poor girls.
Yeah, you don't want to think about that.
You don't want to think about it now.
So Busick acknowledged having known for years that Welch and Pennington were involved in the murders. Busick told investigators that he believed the girls were held at Welch's trailer in Pitcher for about 2 weeks before they were killed. Now, that's pretty horrifying by itself.
It sure is.
A search done in August of 2020 was based on something Busick claimed to have heard Pennington say about having filled in a root cellar around the time of the disappearance of the girls. The search turned up nothing, however.
Well, Tammy Ferrari, the special agent with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, who helped develop the case against Busick, urged the public not to forget about the ongoing search for the girls' remains after the defendant's conviction. J. Bible told reporters after hearing that Busick is out of the family's lives now that they just wanted to go forward with their search for the girls and stay focused on that. So why did it take 20 years to solve this case? That doesn't make sense. Is it as simple as that file of documents that were recovered by the new sheriff in 2017? Is that possible? I think it's a lot of things.
Yes.
So Welch, Busick, and Pennington were not new names to the families, to the private investigators, or to law enforcement. When looking at the affidavits in the case, you can see that tips about these three men had been coming in for years. And several of the people calling in these tips were ex-girlfriends. Their names are being kept secret for their own protection, and most of them indicated that their lives and the lives of their children had been threatened. And maybe you don't say anything for a few months because you're with one of these creeps and you're terrified. But 10, 15 years later, why aren't you saying anything?
I have no answer to that. It's just beyond me.
Yeah. Well, the insurance verification card found by P.I. Pryor on the Freeman property after the fire was followed up on by Pryor after the OSBI agent Nutter showed no interest in it. The woman on the card, E.B., had dated Phil Welch, and he had used her car regularly. Soon after the murders, Welch had been interviewed, and he'd said he didn't know why the card was on the Freemans' property, but he also said he had nothing to do with the crime. And it seems, from all we've looked at, that was the end of it.
Yeah, that was
There was nothing else there until years later. So just thinking about the details of what these girls had gone through is incredibly upsetting. But Laura's parents are determined to find the remains of their daughter so they can have a burial and stop searching. These people have suffered for years. So they really want people to just move on and concentrate on finding the girls.
That might be a tough task.
And it has been so far.
The guy who's in prison says, I have no idea.
Right.
The other two guys are dead.
Yes.
So hopefully one of them talked to somebody.
And are we completely convinced that these were the only people involved?
No.
It doesn't seem that certain to me. And it may be something I'm not privy to as far as information that makes it conclusive, but I do have a hard time believing that this is it. There probably is more to this.
Oh, I think there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, but we'll never know, really.
Well, I think if they ever did find the bodies or the remains of these two girls, that would make the news.
Oh, yeah, it would make the news, but how would they ever find them? They've tried for all these years. If they're in one of those mines, there's miles and miles of those mines.
Well, that's an issue. But if there was somebody who had good knowledge of where they were and you could recover the bodies, that would be some help to the parents.
Well, of course, but I think most people that have or had any information are just incredibly fucked up on drugs or don't care, have no morals, no ethics. Something.
Yeah. Well, there might be someone somewhere out there that will be able to tell them.
Maybe, but it's been a long time now, so I can't be too optimistic about that.
No, I wouldn't be optimistic either.
But I'll be hopeful for the Bibles and for the Freeman family as well. All right, let's wrap this up. TCB's music is written and produced by Tristan Capel. If you have comments for us, a case suggestion, or want to tell us about your favorite beer, send an email to us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. You can also go to our website and write your comments there, or leave us a voicemail. I'll also put a link in our show notes for you to record a voicemail on your device. If you'd like to get your future TCB episodes commercial-free, get an extra members-only episode each month, and get a free gift and some swag, please consider subscribing as a tie grabber at tiegrabber.com. Also, if you enjoy our show, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen. So what have we got for feedback today?
Today, for feedback, we have a couple voicemails and one email. There's only one real case suggestion, so this is some other things to discuss.
All right, first let's hear from Jane.
Hey Jill, hey Dick, this is Jane calling from San Francisco, and I am calling you with empty hands. I don't have a case suggestion and I don't have a beer suggestion. I have a comment on A Good Marriage, which I just finished listening to. There was one thing that didn't make any sense to me, and I was just wondering if you had more color on that or any kind of explanation. Penny it sounds like she was very wholeheartedly devoting her life to God and her husband and her children, and she came last and all that. But yet there's that remark toward the end of the story about her sisters reporting that there had been heated arguments between Roger and Penny. So heated that the sisters thought maybe they should step in between them. And to me, those two things just don't fit. Like, if you really are, obeying your husband and you really are thinking that everything he does is right, because anyway, I can imagine having a difference of opinion, but I can't imagine being in her shoes and having a knockdown, drag out, maybe not punching, but yelling or whatever, fight with someone that I'm supposed to be obeying. So whatever, maybe I'm just making more out of it than there is. But then I also have a question for you. When you're opening the beer, I always wonder, am I listening to a bottle being opened or a can being opened? And I think most frequently I'm hearing a can. And I guess maybe Dick can speak to this a bit, but some so-called beer snobs that I know are like, never drink beer that was in a can. You have to drink beer out of, that was bottled. And I keep, and I have no idea. But if you could shed any light on that, and also just let me know, are they mostly cans, mostly beer, so that I can, continue my weird little trivia thing. Thanks very much, and keep up the great work. You guys know you're the best.
I didn't know that, but thanks, Jane. So I am going to address the question about the good marriage, and then I'll let you address the beer question.
See, that's exactly how I pictured it.
That's how it should be, yes. So as far as Penny, yes, I was a little surprised to hear about the argument where the sisters felt like they had to stand between her and her husband. But I guess the way I was visualizing it, and I have no real facts to back this up, was that he was abusive and more like he was picking on her, yelling at her, demeaning her, making her feel bad. Not that she was necessarily fighting back a lot or yelling back. That's the way that I visualized it, but again, I don't really have any facts why I would do that other than, like you said, she seemed very passive and obedient. So that's the way I saw it. Dickie, is that the way you saw it, or do you have something to add?
It is, but I think there could be ways of Penny showing her kind of resentment
Sure.
at her husband.
And she did have plenty of resentment.
Yeah, and there were things that might have snuck through the facade.
Sure.
So when we did the episode, got to that point, I didn't think that was a huge revelation.
No, because people aren't the same when they're alone at home as they are out in public, for one thing. And I'd say that an important thing to Penny as well was appearances to other people.
Oh, absolutely.
So she certainly wouldn't be involved in any kind of argument with her husband in public. But maybe in the home with just her sisters there, if he was berating her and being awful, which I think he could definitely do, then maybe Penny did have a moment of standing up for herself or defending herself where she argued back, and I could see that.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see it, but I can also see your point, Jane. So I don't know if that really answers it for you, but that's how I felt about it as we were researching and talking about it.
It's clear to me. Now, regarding beers, when you are listening, depending on what we're drinking the beer out of, you'll hear the sound of a bottle cap or a pop top, and even occasionally a cork. Your beer snobs that tell you never a can, always a bottle, that's a dated viewpoint.
Yeah, because things used to be that way.
Used to be that way. Now, more and more beers are in cans. There's a few reasons. One is that the aluminum cans these days don't impact the taste of the beer or anything like that.
And why is that?
Well, the old ones used to be different.
In what way?
They weren't all aluminum.
Oh, okay. I thought some of the cans had actually a coating on them, was my impression.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
But these days, aluminum is the way to go. It's certainly more recyclable than glass, and it's less expensive for the breweries. So you're going to be seeing more and more of a trend to beers being in cans, and it tastes just as good.
Sure. So is that a new thing, the crowler? Right, because you have a growler, which is a big bottle of beer.
You can, well...
And many breweries have crowlers, which are big cans of beer, correct?
Crowlers are 1 quart can. But you can get them, crowlers and growlers, can be both bottles or cans.
Oh, okay. I thought crowler meant can.
No.
Oh, why is it called a crowler then?
It's a little growler.
Okay. All right. Made sense to me that crowler can started with a C.
Yeah. No.
But that was my own headcanon, I guess. Okay, so big news. It's okay to drink beer out of a can now.
It is.
Okay.
And again, more and more beers are coming that way. And they taste really good, just as good as they would be in a bottle.
Excellent. Okay, so our next voicemail is from Cam, and he has a comment and a beer recommendation.
Hi, Dick and Jill. My name's Cam from Vancouver, BC, Canada. I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of the hard work you guys put into each one of your podcast episodes. I've been listening for about 3 or 4 months right now, just catching up on all your episodes. But today I became a subscriber, and I just wanted to commend you guys on the beautiful website. And I think everything's super nice and clean. It makes the listening experience way better, having some of those episodes ad-free. And how everything's archived, it's a lot better than listening to it, for me, on Spotify or any other app. And yeah, basically I just go to work, pop my headphones in, get to work, and just the day flies by just being able to listen to you guys. I think it's awesome. So for anyone out there who's thinking about becoming a subscriber, I definitely recommend it because it just makes everything so much better. I love it, and yeah, you guys are the best. I guess for a beer recommendation, I've been sober for almost a year now, but before that, one craft brewery that I really enjoyed was Fuggles and Warlock from Richmond, BC. Anything from them is really good. I think they do have more fruity beers, so I'm not sure if Dick will really like it, but anywho, definitely look them up. They're great breweries, so yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and keep on doing what you're doing. Alright, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cam, and congratulations on your sobriety. That's awesome.
It is. Not an easy decision to make, not an easy task to achieve.
No, I'm very impressed. So what about the brewery he spoke about?
I've never had any beers from that brewery. But I think if we do a case from Western Canada, that might be one place to get a beer from.
Absolutely. Well, we were planning on taking a trip to Canada soon, so I don't know what area we'll be in, though. So anyway, thanks again, Cam. And we have one email that I'd like you to read, Dickie.
This is from Laura, and it's a case suggestion. So, hi guys, I know you like voicemails, but I do not like my country accent.
Oh, I bet we'd love it, Laura.
We would.
And I understand if you don't want to, that's fine, but I bet it's just adorable.
So with that said, I have a case that you might be interested in. It happened in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Boy, we just did that Oklahoma case.
Oklahoma kind of rears its ugly head quite often in our cases. It's nowhere near Texas and Florida, but it's there.
It can happen.
Yep.
So this is in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma by brothers Robert and Michael Beaver. They killed their family, basically. 2 of the girls lived through it and the rest were killed.
Wow.
There's plenty of info. You are very good at what you do, and I listen to most of your episodes. Thank you for your hard work. So this was in July of 2015. Robert and Michael Beaver. Robert was the oldest, I believe, at 18, and Michael was 16. They killed their parents and 3 of their 5 siblings. So it's a family of 7 children.
Yikes.
One brother who was killed, he had made the 911 call before being killed, and he identified his brother as being the perpetrator.
Wow.
And then a sister who did survive also identified the boys as the killers.
So I'm thinking if those boys were that age, the siblings were likely younger if they were all living at home?
Yes.
So they killed children and their parents.
Right.
Any idea why? Any abuse situation, drugs?
Well,
what was going on?
Strict parents, or at least strict father. No evidence of any severe abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Might have been more emotional abuse. Just they were kind of isolated, didn't have a lot of things that they were able to do. So the idea is that this is just basically a rebellion against the strict parenting.
But my God, if they're 16 and 18, they're right at the cusp of going out on their own anyway.
They can get out, yeah.
That's awful.
And you could say, well, maybe they did it for the rest of the siblings, but they tried to kill them too.
Exactly. It did go through my head. Maybe the parents were abusive and they were trying to protect their younger siblings. But apparently not, because they were trying to murder all of their younger siblings.
Yes.
And did murder 3 of them?
Did murder 3 of them.
Wow.
A 2-year-old, the youngest, was one of the survivors.
Oh, but still, God.
And the sister who survived was like a 13-year-old, and she had her throat slashed and been stabbed. Somehow she lived.
And then the ones that were killed must have been somewhere between 2 and 13?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would like to find out more about that, because this sounds like it has to have some psychology in there. Something was going on.
One would think, huh?
Yeah, so let's look into that one.
We'll check that out.
Thank you, Laura. And if you ever decide to really embrace and love your accent, which I think you should do, give us a call, leave us a voicemail. Absolutely. Well, we appreciate all of the feedback we receive, and we try and play as much of it as we can. So if you have any suggestions, please don't hesitate to call in or send an email. We're going to leave for the day, and we'll be back next week with another episode. So we'll see you at the quiet end.
We'll save a couple chairs for you.
Excellent. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.